living with the symptoms of a mental illness or other long-term situation. Again, thank you for joining us. If you'd like to email us at igbatt, the number one, at AOL.com. You can write us at Post Office Box 7432, Silver Spring, Maryland 20910. Again, this is It's Getting Better All the Time mental health outreach, where we talk about mental health issues from a faith-based perspective, okay? So again, happy Father's Day. Like I said before, by the time many of you see this broadcast, Father's Day will have passed. But I just wanted to say it anyway. Because what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about living with a mental illness. And living with a mental illness, especially if you're a parent, can be challenging, and it can be extra difficult. So I wanted to talk about that, living with a mental illness. But first, I want to share some things first. Living with the symptoms. Well, first of all, why is it such a big deal to having to live with a mental illness? People sometimes have to live with diabetes. Sometimes you have to live with hypertension. You have to live with various other diseases. Why is it so special that when you talk about living with a mental illness? Excuse me one moment. Let me make sure something is here. Making sure our lighting is a little off, seems to be a little off. But anyway, why is it such a big deal living with a mental illness? One of the things, it has to do with the stigma. Anytime you say you've been diagnosed with a mental illness, there's a stigma that goes along with that. And with stigma, it can bring embarrassment, it can bring shame. One of the reasons why I think, when you're talking about from a faith-based perspective, we know what the Bible says, right? When the Bible talks about your thoughts, and we think that having a mental illness is somehow means that that it's kind of like the same thing, and it's not. When we're talking about having a mental illness, we're talking about a diagnosable condition, right? That impacts all aspects of a person's life, thoughts, feelings, and behavior, and it impacts the brain. The brain, an organ, just like any other organ, can become sick. Just like the heart can become sick, the liver, kidney, so can your brain as well. So that's number one. So when people find out that they have a mental illness, or they feel that maybe there's something going on with them, they're a little hesitant, they're shy, they feel embarrassed, they don't really want to talk about it. And when we talk about severe and persistent mental illnesses, and for those of you who follow me, you know what I mean when we talk about severe and persistent mental illnesses. We are talking about a specific category of mental illnesses that have been designated by the federal government, that are so severe and long-lasting that they impact all aspects of an individual's life to an even greater degree. And those are usually schizophrenia, bipolar. So, where again, because I know all illnesses can be severe and persistent, but when we're talking about severe and persistent, we are talking about a specific group. So again, when you're having a mental illness, depending on what it is, and again, we know some people may have one episode, some people may have several, the episodes may be far in between. Some people may have to take medication, some people may not. Some people may have to do, talk therapy. Some people are able to work it through. So it just depends on what it is. As we said before, there are different categories of mental illness. You talk about PTSD. People will ask, first of all, how a person gets a mental illness. It depends on the illness itself. So when you look at PTSD, for example, you can say, okay, PTSD as a result of a specific trauma. Doesn't mean that everybody who experiences the same trauma will have PTSD, but that's just a cause of that particular illness. Then you may have, say, postpartum depression, where you can see a trigger. Well, what caused postpartum depression? Well, postpartum. So it varies. And then there are some illnesses, when you look at schizophrenia, bipolar, for example, is more hereditary. But when you look at some of the illnesses, there's no one cause. There's a combination of factors that all come together within the environment that may cause a person to be diagnosed with a mental illness. So again, you and I, even hereditary, you and I could have from the same mother or same father, and our parents could be diagnosed with bipolar. While the risk may be higher genetically, it doesn't mean we're necessarily predisposed to getting it, or that we will definitely get it. So again, when we talk about mental illnesses, because there's so much shame, stigma, there's a lot of things that's unknown. People don't like talking about it. People suffer in silence. We get used to it. One of the things that we hear a lot is that a person will say, oh, my loved one was fine until they went away to join the military, or until they went to college, or until they got around other people and the people must have put something in their drink. What happens, there's a term called the stress vulnerability model. And what this says is that a person may have a predisposition for a particular illness and they're actually is fine, right? It's just that when they meet a particular stressor, that's when you see the symptoms. So for example, you and I, we may have loved ones that their behavior might be a little peculiar, or you might kind of side-eye it a little bit, but they're our loved ones, we get used to it. The problem is that when my loved one goes away to the military or to school around people who are not familiar with their behavior, and then they're having to keep up, that's when you start seeing the symptoms. So I tell people many times, people went away to school or military or whatever and started having problems, had problems prior to. It's just that the family, the friends, we just kind of got used to it. So again, but when you talk about stress vulnerability model, why do people get sick? It varies. It's a combination of factors coming together. It's not just genetics, and some illnesses it is, or hereditary, and some illnesses you talk about environmental when you look at PTSD, and some illnesses we just don't know. It's a combination of things coming together. And what happens is the physical piece, remember, we're spirit, soul, and body. We have physical part to us as human beings. So when the physical body, it doesn't matter what illness you have, when you're physically not feeling well, it is going to impact everything else. Your thoughts, it's going to impact your spirituality, it's going to impact your behavior. So that's what happens. It's just like anything else. When if you're diagnosed with hypertension or cancer or whatever, it's going to impact all aspects of your body, your health, of your life. Same thing with having a mental illness. What you have the diagnosis, and then you'll have things that will come in and begin to add to it. So you'll have the mental health diagnosis, which is the physical piece of it, that you have to fight. Really stay in the Word to not let it impact you spiritually. You have to look at it. There are 3 different levels. The Word of God talks about prospering in our spirit, soul, and body. So you may have this going over here in your body, right? This is your body. This is what's going on physical. This has nothing to do with you being saved, unsaved, being a Christian, not being a Christian, a good Christian, or whatever the case is, your faith or whatever. The bottom line, your body is telling you physically that there's something going on with you. In this case, when we're talking about mental illnesses, we're talking about a mental illness, something going on with the brain, something going on physically. We talked before about depression. One bad thing about depression is not about thoughts, right? You actually feel depression. You feel it, right? So again, that's one piece of it. At any time you have an illness, it doesn't matter what it is, you're going to have other factors that are going to come in and add to that. So a lot of times people may think there's a spiritual problem, and sometimes it may be. And I say like this, if it is a spiritual problem and you're a spiritual person, the Word of God says he which is spiritual should be able to restore such a one, right? So if you're saying you believe that this is a spiritual problem and you're a spiritual person, then you should be able to pray. You should be able to lift that spirit off of that person because you are a spiritual person. Now, if it doesn't lift, then you might be looking at something physical. So again, got to realize mental illnesses are not just about the way a person thinks, right? It's a spiritual, but it's a behavior. It's a physical. You feel it. Now, once you start feeling bad in your physically, it's going to impact all other areas. So when you talk about from a spiritual standpoint, what happens sometimes is when you're not feeling well, and that's in general, when you're not feeling well, it can lead to feelings of depression. It can lead to other feelings that kind of add to it. And that's what happens when you're diagnosed with a mental illness. All these other feelings and things will kind of add to it, and sometimes when you look at, if you want to talk about demonic or spiritual warfare, when you're not feeling well physically, when you're not at your best, that's the time sometimes that's the demonic force, if you want to call it, or spiritual warfare can intensify, and it can feel like it's all spiritual, but it's not all spiritual. What it is, it's physical. It started in the physical realm, and because now your defenses are down, then you have all these other forces that are coming against you spiritually. So again, but when you talk about having a mental illness, whether it's severe and persistent mental illness or a one-time diagnosis and you're feeling better, there is some embarrassment with it. There is some shame because we forget about the spirit, soul, and body, and we think because I'm dealing with a mental illness that there's something spiritually going on with me, and that's not the case. While it may be physical, will impact the spiritual, it didn't start in the spirit realm. Because if it started in the spirit realm and you are spiritual, you should be able to cast it off or have somebody cast it off. If it doesn't remit, then you know that it's more than just a spiritual issue, right? If you broke your leg, you broke your leg physically, right? You're not going to, necessarily, unless you feel led to do so, pray and, come against and command the leg to, the bones to, come back together. And if you do that, that's fine. If the Lord, blesses you that way, then that's fine. But generally, you're going to go see a doctor. Generally, you're going to kind of see what's going on if your leg is hanging off like that, right? Because why? It's a physical problem. The thing with the mental illness is because we don't necessarily see it. Right? You may see the outcome or the manifestation of the mental illness, but you don't necessarily see it. Like you can see a broken leg, but it's hard to see depression unless you look at the behaviors. You got to look at the behaviors, the symptoms, right? So living with the symptoms of a mental illness as a family member, friend, or survivor can elicit a host of negative feelings. There's a lot of negative feelings that go along with it, depending on who you are. You need to snap out of it. Oh, that's weak. People look at you differently. These negative feelings can lead to behaviors that are unhelpful and keep you away from the plan of God for your life. Remember, God desires that He would prosper spirit, soul, and body. He has come that we might have life and life more abundantly. As I say over and over again, having an illness, a physical illness, does not have to, it doesn't take away, it doesn't erase God's love for you, it doesn't erase the plan that He has for your life. Because before you were born, before the foundation of the world was laid, He had a plan for your life, and He already knew what you were going to be diagnosed with. He already knew what we were going to be missing, our challenges, our struggles. Nothing gets away from God. So it's not surprising to Him. If you are diagnosed with an illness, whatever it is, you're going to have symptoms. So symptoms go along with an illness or whatever it is. You're going to have symptoms. So you can't just think that something's strange. If you have a diagnosis, you're going to have symptoms. So you don't want to beat yourself up about that, because you're going to, like I said again, you're going to have symptoms. Your problem is not the symptoms. The problem is not the illness. The problem is our understanding or resting in God, that even with the illness, even with the symptoms that I'm having, I can still move forward. I just may have to move forward a little slower. I may not be able to get from point A to point B as fast as someone else, but I can still get there. The problem is how I think about my problem, how I think about my symptoms. And what happens with mental illness sometimes is a whole lot of guilt. Or going back to being a father. At being a father, if you're living with a mental illness, there can be some guilt there because you're not able to do the things that you want to do with your children, right? Or you may be able to, you got to take medications, you can't be there for them. But I'm telling you, the problem is how you think about it. Take those feelings and just begin to cast them on the Lord. Lord, I'm casting them on you. Lord, give me your wisdom. Give me your understanding. Give me your peace. I'm going to rest in this. Give me a strategy to live my life to the fullest in the midst of what I'm going through. Give me a strategy to live my life to the utmost, to do what you would have me to do, what you call me to do, because everybody has been called to do something, right? And what happens is these distractions come, illnesses come as a distraction, because now we're distracted on our illness, we're distracted on our symptoms. But it doesn't have to be that way. having a mental illness, depending on when and how you came to realization, can leave one feeling depressed, embarrassed, and or sad. So, for example, the longer we wait, especially when we're talking about severe and persistent mental illnesses, as I mentioned, the longer we wait, the worse, the harder it is, the worse it can become. So, what happens sometimes? Let's take, for example, a family member, okay? You have a family member, something is not quote unquote quite right, and you kind of ignore it, or even you, as an individual. And then now the situation has escalated to a certain point where now you have to call the police. Now, just quote a little known fact. One of the problems and challenges with people in the African American community and other minorities is that many times by the time we get to the doctor, our symptoms are so severe because we waited so long, right? We just try to kind of do it on our own. So what happens sometimes when you're in a situation like that, you have to call outside help, right? So the police may have to come. A crisis team may have to come. They may have to come to physically get you to the hospital. And if that happens, if you are involuntarily hospitalized and everybody in the neighborhood sees it, of course there's going to be some embarrassment. If you're a family member and you have a child or a husband, spouse, and they are not on their medication, it's untreated, and they are doing things in the community, it can be embarrassing. I had a friend of mine, her loved one would just, while she was at work, would go up and down the steps in the apartment complex and, go into the laundry room and just do different things, or make crank phone calls to her friends and, saying different stuff. And, fortunately, we all understood, but that was embarrassment for her, right? It's embarrassment. It's also a shame. Is also a thing where, especially for a parent, when you realize that your child may not be what you thought he or she was going to be. I know a particular family that I was working with. This family, they had an only son, brilliant, brilliant young man, went away to college. And again, talking about the stress vulnerability model, had his first psychotic break. Psychosis, psychotic, what does that mean? That means just being out of touch with reality. He was just out of touch with reality. What causes psychosis? What causes a psychotic break? It could be several things. It depends. Depression, severe depression. It can be drugs. It can be schizophrenia or bipolar can be associated with it, or it could be another illness. So when you say a person is psychotic or they're dealing with a psychotic episode, at that moment you may not really know what the cause of it. That's why you have to evaluate and see exactly what is causing this psychosis or this psychotic break. But the term, when you hear it, it means out of touch with reality. So her son went to college. He was out of touch with reality. He had a psychotic break, and he had to come back home. Now, the first time that this happened, we tried, we talked to the family, we talked to him. The family's like, well, he was fine before this. They must have slipped something in his drink. They must have done something. Okay? Well, we explained to the family, hey, that's possible. But understand the stress vulnerability model and talking to the young man and understanding his symptoms, realized this probably was going on for a while, and the parents just didn't realize it, because again, as family members, we just get used to certain things. We accept certain things, right? And, so we try to work with the family. And let me say this, one of the things that happens is whenever a person is first diagnosed with anything, I think, but especially with a mental illness, no one wants to be diagnosed with a mental illness, especially a severe and persistent mental illness. No one wants to be told that they have to take medications or have this label the rest of their life. No one wants to be told that they're an alcoholic, that they're on or drug user, or whatever the case is. So whenever you get the diagnosis, there is a tendency to try to test the diagnosis. I think everybody who, or many people who've been diagnosed with something that you don't want to be diagnosed with, and you didn't see it coming, you're like, I don't know if that doctor really know what he or she is talking about. You're going to try to test the diagnosis. That's what happens sometimes with substance users, right? They go through the AA process. Some of you know what I'm talking about. You go through the process, AA, NA. The first step is realizing that you're powerless, and you commit to that for a while. But as time goes on, you're kind of like, I think I can handle this. I think I can handle this. And you start backsliding in a sense, and then you wind up having a relapse. Well, the same thing that happens with their mental illness. It takes people some time, a couple of back and forths before they come to the realization that, you know what, I think I do have something going on with me. But for a young person, it can be anybody, but for a young person, it can be definitely hard. But going back to this particular gentleman, is that, he basically he didn't listen to what we would him and his family didn't listen, and that's fine, because sometimes you have to experience things, right? So we was telling him, okay, because he had a scholarship, the school was going to save it. Why don't you just kind of sit out the rest of the year and kind of start getting into the class and getting into groups, understand your diagnosis more? Because having schizophrenic, bipolar, or diagnosis doesn't mean that you can't go to school. It's just like anything else. It's just like if you didn't have any legs, you would go in a wheelchair. So you can go. What is the wheelchair? The wheelchair is that person's aid. The wheelchair is that person's support. Whether it's a wheelchair, walker, sometimes you, depending on if you have a learning disability, you may have to have a tutor. Those are all supports. You can have supports as well going to school if you're living with a mental illness, depending on what it is. So the problem is not him not being able to go to school. The issue was that sometimes you need time to kind of adjust to what's going on. Anyway, they didn't do that. He went back to school. Wasn't long before he was back home again. The school actually, he lost the scholarship. I bring this up to say that for those parents, right? This is was their only child. He was really smart. Like I said, he got a full 4-year scholarship to a really good school. And then having to deal with this, it was a death process. It's a loss. So when living with severe and persistent mental illness or illnesses, having that diagnosis, whether it's yours or your loved one, and you come into that understanding, it's a loss. It's a loss of what could have been, right? A loss of potential, a loss of, will my child ever be able to do A, B, or C? Or will my loved one ever be able to do, whatever the case is? I think about Kanye West and his wife. People don't understand how hard it is to live with someone who has a bipolar diagnosis. I mean, it's difficult, or schizophrenia. It is difficult. It is challenging. There's nothing easy about it at all, especially when the person is still young in their diagnosis, and young meaning, okay, it hasn't sunk in yet, and they're trying to test the judgment of the doctor and test the diagnosis. It can be challenging for their loved one, because you got to watch them go back and forth. Sometimes as family members, you get accused of things, because you're the one that's there. You're the point of contact, right? So your family member will accuse you of putting things in their food. They'll call the police on you and tell the police that you're harassing them. Or they'll take, in the middle of the night when everybody's trying to sleep, they're up yelling and screaming and, running through the house or running into the neighborhood and just doing different things. That all of that is embarrassment, all of that's shame. And for the person with the mental illness, once you start taking your medications and you come to the realization what's been going on, it's embarrassing, right? Because now, you have people looking at you, and you have to kind of deal with that. You have to deal with the impact of being that person. Everybody knows that's the guy that was running down the street naked, or that was the lady where the police had to come and handcuff her and take her away. So there is some embarrassment with it, right? If you first start experiencing symptoms in school, you may have been placed in a special class. So we know mental illnesses, severe and persistent mental illness in particular, are often seen early on. So you see these, as a young person, right? You start seeing some of the symptoms. So if you've been placed in special ed class for whatever reason, that can be embarrassing. Why am I bringing these things up, like embarrassing and, what I say, makes you angry is another term, but I'm bringing these things up, or loss and things like that, because we begin to internalize these things. And as you go through life, you start thinking that, okay, maybe I am stupid. We think being stupid has something to do with having a mental illness. And I keep reminding people that we're talking about having a diagnosis. Because you're diagnosed with schizophrenia, bipolar, whatever the case is, has nothing to do with your intellectual functioning. What happens sometimes is, depending on this is why it's so important to get a diagnosis early and to get treatment. Treatment doesn't always need medications, but at least it could be therapy, it could be something else to learn different coping strategies. Because unfortunately, what happens is that when you don't have a diagnosis, right, or you're not really clear about your diagnosis or what's going on as a young person, you're in special ed and you could be suffering, and people don't really know what's really going on with you. That's why many people start having a substance abuse history early. And you think now that they're older, okay, they had, a substance use or they're a drug user. No, when the issue was they had an untreated bipolar or untreated mood disorder. And what they found out on their own is one of the ways to deal with these racing thoughts, to deal with these, not being able to sit still or deal with what's going on in my mind, is to use drugs, and the drugs help me to feel better. And no one ever realized, okay, no, the problem is that this kid has a untreated mood disorder. And rather than taking medications that can help or getting into therapy to learn how to cope, then when you start taking the substances, you have another issue that can go untreated. So again, as a young person or a person with your first diagnosis, you may be aware that something is not right with you, quote unquote, that something is wrong. You look at your other friends, you look at your other family members, and you notice that something is going on with me. There are many people who are in jail because of untreated mental illness. In fact, the jail is becoming, I saw a headline, it's becoming one of the largest treatment facility, if you will, the largest psychiatric facility. The bad thing about it is there's no treatment in jail. People just go to jail. But a lot of people have untreated mental illness do wind up in the system. Untreated or poorly treated mental illness can leave you open to all types of problems. Untreated mental illness can lead to alcohol, drug use, family violence, workplace arguments, etc. Okay? Rejection, feelings of rejection, not being accepted, or feeling like an outcast are common as well. Other feelings include thinking that you don't fit in, that you are a cast out, that you're on the outside looking in, and are inadequate can be problematic. So again, when you have this diagnosis of a mental illness diagnosis, you can internalize it. Not only do you have people from the outside externally kind of side-eyeing you and say, why don't you, pray more, or something is going on with you. And we all should pray, we all should fast, we all should read our word. But that's not why I have a mental illness, right? That's not why you're diagnosed with diabetes. That's not why you're diagnosed with, hypertension, because, that's not why. You're not diagnosed with hypertension or diabetes because you didn't pray enough, you didn't read enough, you didn't fast enough. That's not why. You're diagnosed with these illnesses because of a predisposition or a condition, an underlying situation that triggered these illnesses. So again, but because we're talking about mental illnesses, think about it. The enemy desires to kill, steal, and destroy. If he can do it through our thoughts, then he has us. So that's one of the things that he's going to challenge. But what happens is, I wish I could have had a good analogy. When you have, by falsely accusing you, right? By falsely accusing you, you have a mental illness, which impacts the way you think. Mental illnesses also impact your behavior, okay? So you have a mental illness that impacts the way you think. Automatically, we put that into a spiritual category, right? So now that it's in the spiritual category, the enemy, because he's an accuser, he's going to accuse you of not being able, the Word of God says you should be able to cast down, use the Word of God to cast down every imagination, every vain thing. He's going to give you all of these scriptures, which is true, which you can still do. But if you have a mental illness, a diagnosable illness, it doesn't really matter how many times you cast down or how you think on these things. Those things will make it better. It's not going to take away from the fact that you have an illness that needs to be treated. So you have to use the right scripture, the right prescription with the right illness, depending on where it's emanating from. Spirit, soul, and body. Is this a spirit issue? Is this a soul issue? Is this a body issue? If he can get you thinking that your physical issue is all spiritual, and then he'll wear you out, because you'll start thinking that there's something going on with you. You start thinking that, okay, why am I praying and why am I fasting and I'm not getting any better? And when you get into this kind of works thing, when you get into this thought process that it's all on you, that you have to pray, that you have to read the word, and that somehow, if you read enough or pray enough, that God is going to, somehow heal you, then the enemy is gotten you into the situation where you are. He's accusing you. He's accuser of the brethren, but he's also getting you in a situation where you see God differently than who He is. God is not punishing you with an illness. He's not putting, like coming around behind you, just keep pinching you, like somebody just keep pinching you to aggravate you. That's not what He's doing. You don't have to beg God to heal you. You don't have to beg God. He sees you. What I want you to understand, nothing else, that there is a strategy, there's a plan. God has already made the way for you with your illness, with your schizophrenia, with your bipolar, with your depression. A way has already been made for you. The problem is, we're so busy focused. The way is over here. The strategy is over here, right? But the first thing we're going to do when we have the mental illness, we're going to we internalize what people are saying, what people are saying about us. Oh, you got to pray enough. There's something wrong with you. You get embarrassed. You're ashamed. So what happens is, the answer is over here. But see, in order to get to the answer, you have to come to a state of acceptance. And as I said before, acceptance is not necessarily giving up, but it's understanding that God has something in store for me. That in spite of my illness, in spite of me hearing voices, in spite of my symptoms, because I'm going to have, because I'm diagnosed with an illness, that God still has something in store for me. But what happens is, instead of us looking at the source here, right, we focus here. And what happens is the enemy wants to, we're here. He wants to kind of keep us, right, from getting to seeing what God has for us. So if I'm looking at this, if I'm looking at this, what am I looking at? I'm looking at, I should pray more. So now if I pray more, I'm in a fight now. I'm in a contest trying to get God to do something, trying to get Him to do something that He's already done. I need to pray more. I need to read my word. I need to get in the scripture. I need to fast more. And then when God doesn't do these things, then what happens? Now, what does the accuser of the brethren do? We start thinking, I got to do more. I got to pray more. I got to fast more. And then you pray more, you fast more, and you still have the symptoms. Then you're like, hey, maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe, I'm meant to be a loser. All of these thoughts start coming towards us. All of these negative thoughts, all these negative feelings. And then what happens when we start thinking negatively, when we start feeling negatively, we're going to start thinking negatively, and we're going to start behaving negatively. And what we're going to do, we're going to be so caught up over here that we're going to be going down the road. The enemy will just have us following this. Something wrong with me. I'm stupid. Nobody likes me. Rejection issues will come up. Automatic, why are people always against me? People don't like me. I'm praying, I'm fasting. You're praying and fasting 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, still nothing happening. You still, have the symptoms over here. And what the enemy desires to do is to wear you out with your problem. But when you can lay it down, just lay it down. God, this is Jesus, this is what's going on with me. You already know. I'm not going to be so caught up on the problem, of all problem situations. I'm going to look to You and live. I'm going to look to You because, God, You knew me before the foundation of the world. You knew that I would be diagnosed with schizophrenia. I would be diagnosed with bipolar, whatever that they call it. And You know what my symptoms would be. You taking all of that into account, and you're still saying that I got a purpose for you, that I have a plan for your life. God is saying I still have something in store. See, the enemy's desires is to kill, steal, and destroy, to get you so distracted that you won't fulfill the plan that God has for your life. Having schizophrenic bipolar diagnosis doesn't mean that you cannot fulfill the plan that God has for your life. What keeps us is when we're so focused on this being the problems, this being all the situations and what people say, and I always got to pray and fasting. Because sometimes we can be praying and fasting against the will of God for our lives. If you pray, you fast, you believe that He heard you, then now it's time to begin to walk like He heard you. right? You begin to move like he heard you, like you believe. Because if you believe he heard you, and we serve a good father, right? On Father's Day, no good father is not going to hear their child saying, "Daddy, Daddy, can you give me an ice cream? Please give me an ice cream. Please give me an ice cream," and not going to get their child an ice cream, right? At some point. Right? Daddy may say, "Wait a minute, because it's 3 a.m," or Daddy might say, "No, you got to eat your food first." But Daddy's, at some point, that kid is going to get the ice cream. Why? Because Daddy loves his child. It's the same thing. What more about with our Father? He wouldn't see you. There has to be a strategy. You got to say to yourself, there has to be a strategy. There has to be a plan. There has to be something that I can incorporate into what I'm dealing to get through what I'm dealing with, right? Whether it's medications, whether it's therapy, whether it's talking to somebody, whether it's music, whatever it is, there has to be a strategy to kind of take the edge off what I'm going through, okay? But the enemy wants to get you, all you can see is your problem, your symptoms, what people are saying, what you're not. All of that is just the accuser of the brethren that's accusing you. Okay? Thinking that you don't fit in, that you are cast out, or like I said, you're on the outside looking in. And it's real easy to feel like you don't fit in when you're the only person with an illness, when you're the person, everybody knows you were in the hospital, right? But here's the thing, you have to begin to tell yourself, use that, turn that around, begin to talk about it and say, yeah, I had to go to the hospital, and I know that can be a little embarrassing for people. Let me look at my time here. I'm just going. Look at my time. I'm sorry. And we just keep going, and not realizing. Okay, I'm going to give myself a little more. Okay. So, let me kind of go back to what I'm saying here. You can move forward, but it's the strategy, okay? The plan. Everything that we've gone through, God has a plan, a strategy for us. You may be feeling embarrassed because everybody know you're the kid that had to go to the hospital, or you're the lady that the police had handcuffed and take to the psych ward. When you get out, when you get better, acknowledge it. Yeah, I went to the psych ward. This is what happened. And God will give you a plan to get through that rejection, to deal with that self-esteem, the low self-esteem. Because anytime you're different, you feel like you don't fit in because of a mental illness, it impacts your self-esteem. I would like for you to do, get a pen and a paper and write down all the negative things that you say to yourself. And sometimes you may not be able to see it or to hear it. Hear yourself. It's those automatic thoughts that we say. Sometimes you have to ask other people to let you know, and sometimes you really have to think about it. But think about, how did you feel when this happened to you, right? The negative things. Did I feel stupid? Did I feel weak? Did I feel like people are talking about me? Write all those things down and then begin to present those to the Holy Spirit and ask Him to give you a plan, to cleanse you, to give you a strategy, okay? Because what happens is the enemy wants us to stay in embarrassment. He wants you to always feel lonely and to feel like nobody loves you. Feel like people are talking about you. And it may be true, people are talking about you. But then that's their business. But, we can't let the fact that people are talking about us get us to the point where we overlook what God is saying about us, right? And He said we're fearfully and wonderfully made. Feelings that cause you to go on the defensive, to overcompensate by allowing people to take advantage of you. Overcompensates by saying yes to things that you really don't want to say yes to. This is what happens when you don't have, when you feel you have these negative feelings about yourself, you get super defensive. Somebody might not even be talking about you, and you just get super defensive, right? You could say something about, these people with these red shoes. Why is she talking about people with red shoes? Okay, nobody was talking about you specifically, but you can become overly defensive. Okay, you always see people out to get you. Overcompensate by allowing people to take advantage of you, and this happens a lot. Especially for those of you who are family members, or if you're living with a mental illness and you're listening to me, one of the things that does happen, right? People try to take advantage of you before you know it because you want a friend. You try to overcompensate. They have you doing things because they think that they can do what they do. They take advantage of you. They'll have you babysitting. They'll take you to the store. It takes 10 minutes to go to the store and they'll charge you $100, right? They exploit you. So a lot of things happen. It doesn't feel good. You don't have to put up with that exploitation. You don't have to put up with people taking advantage of you. You can say no. And that can be hard, especially when the people you're saying no to are people that you have to rely on, or people who have been there for you in the past, right? But you can, again, all of these things, you can take it to the Father. You can take it to our Father in prayer and say, God, this is what's going on. What should I do? And I'm telling you, He'll give you a strategy. He'll give you a way out. God's hand is not weak and His ears are not heavy. This is a scripture. The same way He loves this person over here, it's the same way that He loves you. Having a mental illness doesn't exempt you from the love of Jesus Christ. Having a mental illness doesn't mean, like I said before, that you can't fulfill the plan of God for your life, right? Doesn't mean that. It just means that you may have to, a little struggle, okay? Hard, struggle, and painful are some of the adjectives that people will use when they're talking about having to live with a mental illness. But I'm saying to you, if you're having to live with a mental illness, you're stronger than you think. If you're a parent, a father in particular, and you're living with a mental illness, be honest about where you are. You don't necessarily have to tell your children everything about what you're going through, because you want to have some boundaries, some parent-child boundaries. But you want to be honest. If you don't feel like it or feel a certain way, you want to let people know what's going on. You don't have to feel guilty. I think the more you talk about it, the more we open it up about it, the more we normalize things, the better things will be. So when we talk about impact of untreated or poorly treated mental illnesses, it can cause a disruption in our work history. In family life, definitely impacts the family life. When you talk about depression, you can have a father who was doing great, and then all of a sudden he starts withdrawing, sleeping a lot, not feeling like doing the things that he wants to do, used to do, being irritable. And one of the things with men in particular, when you talk about one of the symptoms of depression, you see a lot more of irritability, you see a lot more angry, like, oh, why are they so angry, right? But all of that can disrupt the family life, and people are wondering what's going on. And if that's you, I'm saying to see a doctor, because you don't have to live this way. You don't have to. The enemy wants us to think that we have to live in defeat, that we have to live in embarrassment or shame. We don't have to live that way. Negative feelings. Okay, again, I'm talking about the impact of untreated or poorly mental illnesses. Disruption in work history, disruption in family life, negative feelings, stigma, jail, loss of productivity, homelessness. A lot of homeless people living out on the street, have untreated mental illnesses. Chronic medical problems, untimely deaths. People die by suicide because they don't see the pain of their depression is so harsh for them that they don't see any other way. Loss of potential. And I'm going to come back to that. Loss of hope, tiredness, increased stress, helplessness, grief, fear, worry, anger, resentment. Because it's like when you have an untreated mental illness, it's like you're going down. You're losing functioning. You're losing productivity. It's like something just sucking you in. And what, unfortunately, for some people, or depending on how you look at it, you being sucked down, you get used to it, right? I think I shared this before. I went to the doctor, and I can't remember what everything's supposed to be, to the hematologist, and he was talking to me about my blood levels. And he was saying these blood levels, because they were really low, he was saying that this is over time. Right, you're losing this over time. And he said what happens is when you start losing it, because they was asking, well, how are you walking around like this? How are you, functioning like this, right? At first, I was talking to a nurse, and then I talked to the hematologist when we were talking, and he was saying what happens is when you start going down, you adjust to it. You adjust to it, and you don't realize that you're adjusting to something that's abnormal. You're adjusting to, your levels going down, down, down. You find ways to adjust. You adjust to, and like I said, a normal situation. You don't know. You just know you got to keep going. You just know you got to get, do something. It's not until you get the proper treatment. Until I got the proper treatment and things started going back up, I was like, wow. I had all this energy. You see me moving around now. Had all this energy. I was like, wow. I didn't feel that before. Because what happens, it was little by little. So when you talk about having a untreated mental illness, and you lose potential little by little, because your focus is just on trying to stay alive. Your focus, and I know for some of you may not understand what I'm talking about, but some of you do. All your focus is on just getting out of bed, right? If you can just get out of bed, right? If you can just get into the shower, that's where all your focus is, right? And if you could just get to work, and then for the 8 hours, how are you? How's everybody doing? Okay, all right. Let me check you in, or all right, let me type this up. Hey, man, right. Did you see the stories? Oh, did you see the show? Oh yeah, da da da. You all your energy is on focus on just being up for those 8 hours, making that drive. And as soon as you get in the car, you're just like, oh my God. And then when you get home, nobody knows that when you get home and shut that door, you may or may not even take a shower. You just go lay down, or maybe if you do take a shower, maybe, but you go straight to sleep under the covers, and that's where you are. People don't know that when you left work Friday, okay, you didn't get up again until Monday. You may have got up to use the bathroom, but Monday morning, and even then it was a struggle. So what happens is when you're going down, all of your energy, your strength is focused on trying to maintain. Trying to just make it. I'm just trying to make it, right? You're dealing with these voices in your head. These voices are saying, you're not going to make it. Look at you. The mind, the smallest thing. You knock something over, and I knocked my pen on the floor. You got to reach for the pen. Dang, man, I just can't get nothing right. It was just a pen that fell on the floor. But because of the mindset, the way you're feeling, everything becomes magnified, right? You knock this over. Oh, shoot. God, I just knocked everything over in life. I just think life just never going to go fair. Don't ever go well for me. This cup says it's getting better all the time. I can't even make it. Nothing's getting better. Nothing is working. That's what happens. You get into this, nobody loves me, I'm worthless, I can't make it mindset, and that's what the enemy wants us to do. Because if he can get your thoughts, get you start thinking negatively, if you can start feeling and behaving negatively, then you will not fulfill the plan of God he has for your life. That means the enemy has killed, steal, and destroy. That's his plan. Try to kill, steal, and destroy the plan that God has for you in your life. Okay, so I wanted to focus on, for me, the loss of potential. That's the biggest thing. Is the impact of the untreated mental illness is because we're focusing so much on dealing with, I have to write something, the pain that that's what we're focused on. We focus on dealing with the dysfunction, okay? But the loss of potential, because you spend so much time just shadow boxing or fighting the pains, fighting the symptoms, that you don't realize the time is passing, right? You don't realize that you're getting older, your children are getting older. You don't realize that life is passing you by. It's only when you start getting a handle on your mental illness and start, talking to somebody about it, whether it's taking medications, or whatever the case is, and you start feeling better, that you realize, wow, I could have been feeling better a long time ago, right? And that's what happens. So again, lost potential, because you never get to, so many people never get to that point. So many of us never get to that point where God really desires for us to be. Because we get distracted without the symptoms. Well, you may not be a schizophrenic, bipolar, or mental illness. You're getting distracted with your child going back in and out of prison. You're distracted with your marriage. You're distracted with your children in general, which is a good distraction. But sometimes the enemy can use anything that's good, and before you know it, you forgot about your dreams and what the God has called you to do. Okay, you can be distracted with work. You could be. You said you were going to start a business, but now you're in this job and you're just it's just a job, because you got to make it. You're distracted with making ends meet, that you forgot about your business plan, right? So you can be distracted with so many things, because if the enemy can get us distracted, it's easier for him to kill, steal, and destroy our vision. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it here for now, and just say again, the problem is not the problem is not the problem. The problem is not your illness or your symptoms. That is not the problem. That is not what is holding you back. What is holding us back is our perception of the problem, how we live out the problem, what we think about it, right? You have to know God has a potential for you. He has a plan for you. Log on to our website at igbatt.com, and it's actually being updated. Or you can go to igbattmho.org. If you are listening to me now, and I want to just share a number with everyone, if I can get to it. Wanted to share a number. If you know someone, of anyone that's need somebody to talk to, it's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and this is not for people who are necessarily thinking about killing yourself, but if you need somebody to talk to, 1-800-273-8255. Again, that's 1-800-273-8255. And of course, you can go to our website at igbatt.com. You find out more about us, or you can go to, not just to find out more about us, we have a lot of resources on the website as well to kind of to help you. So you can go to igbatt.com or igbattmho.org. Our website is being updated, and I'm excited about that. But again, email me, igbatt1 at AOL.com. Somebody will promise to write you back. But again, happy Father's Day, and we love you, and God bless.